This episode of A Wealthy Life covers the very contentious or potentially emotive issue of flats, particularly in the light of the Grenfell report, the tower block in London that so sadly burnt and was responsible for the deaths of some 70 odd people a couple of years ago. I really want to go through the facts about the difference between investing in flats and houses, because frequently I speak to people and I let them know, and I'm obviously not getting my message across, because in the end, what they end up doing is investing in a flat, potentially because it's cheaper. Now, I will be completely honest. I have bought flats. Our original flats were, or our original property investments were flats in London. Thankfully for us, purely by chance, they are brick built and not affected by the cladding. The other thing that we did was we always made sure that really what they were two maisonettes stacked on one another. So they look 4 stories high, but you only go up one set of stairs, and then it's a flat over 2 floors, and downstairs is a flat over 2 floors. I have also got some flats in Liverpool, the last ones remaining in our private name, and we will be selling those as soon as we can find somebody that wants to buy them. Again, very, very lucky. 3 stories only, single flats in a brick Victorian building. So I have been very fortunate. However, what I have learned from those flats and the performance of those properties compared with the properties that we bought that were houses is completely different. And that's what I'm going to share with you in this episode. So enjoy a wealthy life, and over to me speaking about flats and houses and how flats could put a crack in your property foundations. Hello and welcome. My name is Vicky Washea and this is A Wealthy Life. And we're going to be talking about how flats might put a crack in your property foundations. And what do I mean by that? That if you don't understand what you're getting into, oh goodness, actually, let's just start generally with property, but specifically with flats and how they are different. I would actually say they are an investing technique on their own. And there are some people that go out there and they buy them. And there are ways to buy them that actually are quite interesting, because I do it for some of my clients. But a flat, a single flat in a block, is a completely different proposition. And the reason I want to share this with you is that I was speaking to somebody recently and they were wondering about whether to work with me. And in the end, they decided that instead of investing in a 3-bed family house with the whole rights to the land, a freehold property, when you bought the house, you bought the ground it sat on as well. That's important. They went and bought not just a flat, but a new build flat. And the numbers didn't work. And it's too late then. They could have pulled out, but they didn't want to. They'd committed themselves to this deal, and that's it. And there's nothing I can do to help them. And I wish them all the best, frankly. Not to be unpleasant, but there's nothing I can do to help, because once you're in for 3 to 5 years, depending on the mortgage you take, and then you've got to be able to sell to get back out again. So let me explain why I thought this was a dangerous idea. So number one, it was a new build property. Any new build property, you have to remember, a bit like buying a brand new car, the minute you take it off the lot, it's lost in value. Now, a car depreciates because in the car park of the garage, it has never been used. The tyres have never been used. Not completely true, but I'm making a point. And therefore it holds a value. As soon as you drive it out onto the road, it's secondhand, it has a different value. With a flat, as soon as you buy it, you have to bear in mind that you have paid the profit for the developer. So there are ways, and right at the very beginning of our investing, we looked at a strategy which was about buying the last few flats of a development. So basically, a developer has gone in and built maybe 100 units, let's say, over a couple of blocks, sold most of them, and there might be 2 or 3 or 4 flats left. That is pure profit to them at that point. They've covered all their costs, and they're probably, definitely should be already in profit. So those last few flats are just profit, and that's where you can negotiate, and so you can bring the price down. I still wouldn't do it. I still wouldn't do it. So, number one, new build, you're paying for the developer profit. Two, that bit I mentioned about owning the ground. When you buy a house, although very occasionally they can be leasehold properties, often because a council has gone in and filled in a gap, and councils have been holding the leases on houses, and then they get sold off, and there are people that have a strategy where they own freeholds on properties, and that's how they make their money. Keeping it simple, when you buy a house, you have a fence around the sides, you tend to own, in 95% of the time, all the bricks of the house and all of the dirt that the land is sitting on. When you buy a flat, whether you're on the ground floor or the top floor, you're all stacked, or you're side by side and stacked. And therefore there is, let's call it a square of land on which maybe 5, 10, 15, 100 flats might be built within this square circle of the foundations, but they are stacked on one another. So you can't own the land because there are 2 to 100 flats that have to share in that ownership. And so what happens is you get a freeholder, and they are the person that has the right, or company, the right to the land. They then are responsible for the whole of that piece of land. So there might be parking, there might be a bins area, there'll be access and possibly some vegetational garden or grass at the front, and similarly at the back. And so they're responsible for all that land. They then also, because of the nature of freehold leasehold, you are only responsible for the little box that is your flat. You're not responsible for the doors and the stairs that you have to pass through to get to your flat. That remains the responsibility and the ownership of that freeholder. So therefore, a freeholder, if they don't apply charges to you, have to pay the door maintenance, the lock maintenance, the cleaning of the central areas, the lighting and heating of the central areas. They're responsible for the roof, they're responsible for the garden, they're responsible for the car park and the fences. And so they have costs, and naturally they pass them on. Typically what a freeholder does is take on a management company. Sometimes the freeholder is the management company, but typically this is outsourced to, I suppose, a freeholder's version of a letting agent. It's someone they use to manage all of the work. So sorting out the paying of the gas and electric bills, the sorting out of mowing the garden and surfacing the garden, the car parking area and the bins, etc. And so that's a managing agent. And so what you get is you get charges, and your charges very, very simply are ground rent, which could be any amount. Often it's a small amount of money, and that is the contract between you and the freeholder. And then there are management costs, and this is where the management agency will set a fee that it charges you, the flat owner, to manage that property on behalf of the freeholder. And they throw in there the buildings insurance, because otherwise who would pay for the buildings insurance? You own flat 4, third on the left, so the whole building has to be insured. That's included in the management fees. So you will save on your buildings insurance on a house, typically 300-400 quid, depends where you are and how big it is, etc. So you'll save that charge, but you will have a management fee. Now, these management fees can be as little as £25 a month up to £150 a month. That's some of your profit going. Yes, it could be offset a little bit about the buildings insurance, but primarily it costs you more than you've saved in insurance. So that's the leasehold charges. But there is also a contract between you and the freeholder, operated by the managing agent, that will have certain restrictions. Now, you might get this when you buy a house, because when you buy a house, if you ever read your land registry, there could be covenants. So typically things with houses are They might say you can't run a business from this area, you can't mine 10 foot down in your garden to take out natural ores or something because it's owned by an ancient landowner or something. You have to be responsible for drains and utilities that cross your premises. Those are all normal. When you have a leasehold contract, you can have extra terms in here, and this is really interesting, that says you have to occupy it for a certain amount of time, or conversely, you can't occupy it for a certain amount of time. Or more commonly now, because of a lot of Airbnb or serviced accommodation, investment techniques going on out there, people doing serviced accommodation, what you find is that they put a bar and they say that you are only allowed to sub-rent your property for 90 days. Now, this can have a whole issue with you being able to buy a flat and actually rent the flat to an entire family, never mind break it up and use it as serviced accommodation. So you really need to understand your lease and the conditions of the lease. So the lease has charges and the lease has conditions. The other thing that the lease has is a term. And initially, when they started out in the old days, they were like 999 years. And then they worked out, well, if they make them shorter, they can charge you to extend them. So a typical maximum lease is something in the region of 125 years. If you've owned the property for 25 years, or your vendor has owned the property for 25 years, you will only have 100 years left on the lease. When you get down to 90, you will find that lenders are less happy to lend. And you then can get yourself into a situation where you can't sell the property without renewing the lease, or you can't remortgage the property without renewing the lease. And this is an issue because in order to renew your lease with the freeholder, guess what? There are fees. So the freeholder will charge you a fee. And of course, you've got solicitor's costs to do all of this. Depending on who the freeholder is, and depending on how much or how little time you have left on the lease, how much they might charge you. Because obviously they'll realise if you've got a property that's only got 80 years left on the lease, you can't sell it, you can't remortgage it because nobody will buy it because they can't get a mortgage, and therefore they can charge you more money. And that is why some people buy freeholds, not the property itself, not the flat, not the house, just the freehold, in order to be able to charge these fees when the freeholds come up for renewal. And you're stuck. This is down to you now. You have to pay this. So really understand the terms of your lease, the length of your lease, and the monthly charges. The third thing to look at, although really it's all part of the same thing, is understanding that there will be major repairs. So I've mentioned that the freeholder is going to be responsible for the roof. What happens if the roof starts leaking? And it doesn't matter whether this property is a Victorian house split into two and it's only 2 floors high, or it's a large block of flats. If there's works that need doing, changing the windows, painting, replacing the roof, cleaning and maintaining the gutters, those costs, along with the costs of repainting the halls, repairing doors, internal doors, fire doors, changing the lighting in the communal areas, all of those costs get passed on to you, the collection of flat owners. Now, you don't have any control over this work. This work is usually organised by that managing agent using their contractors. Yes, they're supposed to go out and get quotes, but you will then get this charge. So one of our properties is in Islington. It was a bargain when we bought it. And I think if I knew anything, if I could go back in time, I would probably buy a couple more of those flats in, let's say, 2004 to 2007, and I would sell them in 2017. So I would sell them within 10 years. And the reason I would do that is because my 150, why am I so successful? There you go, because I know this stuff. It is that in that 10-year period, my £150,000 flat went up to £450,000. We did sell one of them at the time. We then kept the others. Along came COVID. People didn't want to live in flats. They've got a whole bad feel to them. Never mind the issues of Grenfell, and the property values have dropped. And they dropped back £100,000 in the space of 12 months. Yes, they're crawling back up again, and that's caused by the fact that we're a shortage. But if they hadn't dropped down to COVID, they could be worth £500,000 or more now. But you can't tell what is going to affect the value of some properties. And I will come back to Grenfell in a minute. Now, those flats, or that flat, was a freeholder called Islington Council. Now, if you could just imagine the mega monstrosity that a council is. Any works they do are millions of pounds. There are probably, let me think of my block, there are probably no more than 20 downstairs maisonettes and 20 upstairs maisonettes, so 40 flats in the block. And when they not replaced the roof, repaired the roof, our share of the costs was £8,000. I could do a whole house for that. I could do I could replace the roof on my house, including scaffolding. We paid 12 grand. Now, this would be the two, there's somebody underneath me and me on the top. We are a unit, and it cost 8 for me and 8 for downstairs. So that's saying that bit of flat roof, not replaced, just patched, cost 8 grand. So you can see how the costs are extortionate. Then there are lift repairs, there are door repairs, there's obviously the management fees that come in with the cleaning and, you know, maintaining everything. So it's not something that is easy for you to control, and it's not something for you to be able to fully budget for, because you might know that there are cyclical repairs coming, maybe every 3 years, maybe every 7 years. But how do you know what the fees are going to be? You can't predict them. So another thing that I would say to you about leases and the fact that they have costs and they have to be extended and they are in charge of the repairs is that point I made about insurance. So the building's insurance is taken care of by the freeholder, but if you don't think to take out contents cover, the inside isn't taken care of. And one of the flats that we had, after one of the roof repairs, had water pouring in. So after a 3-year fight, we have managed to get the freeholder, Islington Council, through their management system, which is a department in the council, to accept responsibility to take care of the repairs, but it only covers what's classed as buildings cover. So they'll repair the roof, great, that stops the water coming in. They will deal with the outside wall, which has become wet, so we'll take the plaster off and replaster it and paint it because they've put it back. But the flooring, depending on the type of flooring, isn't necessarily part of the building's cover. If I have got carpet down, carpet would be considered contents. And if I didn't have contents insurance and that carpet had got damp and smelly, I didn't have this, but if I had, then I would have been responsible for it. And if having painted that wall made the rest of the room look dreadful and they didn't pick the right colour, I would have to pay to paint the rest of the room and maybe, you know, the ceiling of the room. So you need contents cover. So though you might save on the building's insurance, you're still going to have to pay for the contents cover. A separate point, the nature of a flat brings you into closer contact with people. Now, you could have this if you had a relatively new build house in a row of terraces. And when I say new build, I mean properties that aren't the solid Victorian construction. Often a lot of new build properties use timber frames or they're using plasterboards and cavity walls. And so sometimes in a house, you can hear the neighbours. Now imagine that you're in a flat, you've got neighbours above you, neighbours below you, maybe neighbours, if you're in a big enough flat, to the left and the right, and then you walk out your door and you meet another 3 neighbours opposite you. You'll find that flats develop personalities. If they're small, the personality could be friendly, could be connected, could be cooperative. If the block is large, and if there is a good or large percentage of landlords, and those landlords aren't managing the properties well, or finding them hard to rent, or whatever other reasons, start bringing in more challenging tenants, just to be polite. Not necessarily that are on benefits, because people on benefits can be perfectly fine. I've been a benefit tenant myself in the past. It doesn't have to say you're an animal, but I definitely bought into a block of flats in Liverpool where the landlords started to struggle. They bought at the height of the market. I bought as the market crashed, so I got a bargain on the price. But what I then found is that there were landlords there who couldn't afford to remortgage, couldn't afford to pay the service charges. Well, if your neighbour's not paying the service charge and the work still needs to be done, where is that money raised from? It's increased on the rest of us. The burden is on the rest of us. And then the tenant types started to change. And it was a battle when the managing agent doesn't have any control over the individuals that rent the flats to control the quality of the people in there. So we started to get massive dogs. Thank goodness that the law has knocked that on the head. But giant dogs in flats is not a good idea, because they promptly let everybody out. All the dogs go out and then mess all over the communal area. Not a pleasant situation. Not to mention the barking of flats in dogs while people are out to work. We then also got a couple of grows. So people creating weed farms, cannabis farms in the flats instead of actually putting a tenant in. The way they made money is they rented it to somebody who wanted to grow drugs there. All sorts of issues. So thinking about the size of the block that you're in and the personality of the block is absolutely crucial. And I'm going to round all of this up at the end, and I will give you ways that you can get round these, but I want to highlight these issues: the lease, the repairs, the nature of the neighbours and the personality of the block. And then we can't get away from talking about Grenfell. And the issue with Grenfell is that it was built in brick and then they put cladding on. Now, cladding could be any sort of material. You'll have seen it on some properties where, for example, you put lengths of timber, horizontal lengths of timber, and it makes it look all wooden and pretty. So you can have that. You can have them in a sort of UPVC. So you often see them where they are the white panels, white vertical planks, as it were, looking on the walls. You can have in houses, you can have it where it is, you use pebble dash. So this is a mixture of cement and stones put on the wall. You'll see it on some houses where they bricked the front of the houses up. So they put this sort of ornamental brick on the front. But in the situation with Grenfell, and I'm not going to get into all the details, they used a material on the front. Now, this material, nothing in the world is 100, well, that's not true because possibly meteorites are, but very little is 100% fireproof. It's just the level at which it either catches fire or starts to melt that is important. So fire retardancy. So this product on the outside would have had approved, whether it was enough, but approved at the time, fire retardancy, fire rating. But what happened is that in putting the cladding on the wall, they used battens. I'm gonna make it simple in our English. They used battens to bring it off the wall so that they could screw in, and that created this tiny chimney. Now, the chimney effect, it could have been a centimetre, it could have been half a centimetre, but hot air rises, the flames were sucked up, and this is how it went up. Now, the question for you is, How has your block of flats been constructed? Is there anything on the outside covering up actual bricks? So if, for example, you've got a Victorian house, maybe 3 stories high, this would be a typical example, split into 2 flats, or maybe it's a Victorian large semi-detached old house that might have been split up into 5 or 6. And what you can see is the original Victorian brick on the outside. You know that the construction is brick, that there is nothing there that can catch fire on the outside. There will be safety issues on the inside, and this is why you need fire alarms and call points, etc. And the larger the system, sprinkler systems. But when you're looking to buy a flat, how is it built? How safe is it? There have been reports on the news, if you listen to the news when they're talking to people about this, where their flats have been theoretically repaired. The cladding has come off and they've put more cladding on, but they're talking about examples where not all the cladding has come off, and maybe they've left the cladding around the stairwell, which is the only exit point. So you really have to understand the construction of the property. And so if you're going to get into a flat, I think you need to have a conversation with a surveyor who understands how that property was built and can give you the assurance that you need. Now let's talk about values. I've just mentioned how with the arrival of the pandemic and everybody not wanting, well, everybody wanting outside space, so everybody not wanting to live in a flat, we lost theoretical value. It didn't make any difference. We still had the tenants still paying the same amount of rent. We still own the property. We've still made 200,000 at least on the value of the property, and we've done nothing to it in 10 years. So that's been absolutely fine. But there is a value limitation, because if I was a house, and let's say I'm in a row of terraced houses, I can do things like change my front door. I could put on a porch. I could create a bay window. I could change the double glazing. I could do an extension out the back. I could do a loft extension. Why? Because I own all the land. I own all of it. And within building regulations and planning permission, I can do what I like on my property. So I could add value. Even if I don't structurally alter the property, I could do a complete redecoration. I might knock through a wall and make an amazing kitchen diner space with one of those floating islands in the middle, and that would increase the value compared to the other 9 or 10 that are in the row that I'm in. That is possible. Now you're in a flat and you want to update the kitchen. Great, you can. You can't knock down a wall without permission, because the walls, the construction of the property aren't yours. You can't move the bathroom without permission. You can't put in a new bathroom without permission, because you have to go to the freeholder, because the conditions on your lease will be that you cannot alter it. And therefore, how can I make my flat worth, never mind any more than your flat, just worth more? I can't. So I cannot force the appreciation of a flat. I am only ever going to be in that position where my flat, if done up to the best standard, will only be worth as much as the last highest sold flat. So the most recent flat, at whatever that value was, that will set the boundary for mine. If that flat wasn't done up at the time and mine is done up, I might be able to increase the value by 10 or 20,000 pounds and set a new value for the block. But there are very serious value limitations. And then, as I've said to you, you're not going to be able to develop it. You can't vary it in any way. And of course, there are those restrictions on serviced accommodation. And even on my flats that I have, and I'm just renting them out to people, I have had to get permission for renting the property out. I have had to show them a copy of my assured sole tenancy in order that I can have permission to allow the non-owner, i.e. me, living in my flat. So there's quite a lot involved in buying flats. You've got understanding the leases, so knowing what restrictions there are, knowing what charges there are. You've got no control over the repairs. you've got lease renewal, you've got neighbours, you've got constructions, you've got value limitations. Now, just to say, if, and I've mentioned this a couple of times through the podcast, what you're looking at is buying 2 flats and they are the only 2 flats in a Victorian house, or like I have been buying for some of my clients, 3 flats in a Victorian property or 5 flats in a Victorian property. And what you're buying is the entire, let's call it brick building, and the freehold. That's really important. And the ground that that building sits on. And you have 2, 3, or 4, 5 flats in a building and you own the freehold. That's a completely different proposition, but that takes money. You know, instead of buying a house at 100,000, if you're buying 3 flats, the one we were looking at last week is 250,000. So considerably more. It's a larger property. It's over 3 floors. Yes, it's been split into 3 flats, but then what you've got to do is you've got to make sure that it's compliant. And in this case, the original owner or the current owner did a lot of the work themselves. So in order to make sure that that flat is compliant and that the council are happy, I would want to look at all the wiring. I would look at a rewire on 3 flats, 15 grand. I would look at the boilers and the plumbing. I might not have to change it, but I would need to look at it. Let's say another 2 grand a property, so that's 6. And then I would look at the decoration. Oh no, before I do the decoration, I would look at the fire system. So is there a fire alarm? Are there smoke detectors? Is there emergency lighting? Is there signing? I think I would probably add 15 grand for that over 3 floors and all the way. It might be fine, but I would need to budget for it. Then I would look at the decoration. So within each flat, if I was just redecorating 1-bed flats, putting in new carpets, say 6 grand a flat, so that's another 18. I'd then have to look at the communal areas and decorating those. Over 3 floors, carpet, everything else, let's just say another 6 grand. And then what if I needed to put in new kitchens and new bathrooms? And I might not have to, but if I was doing all the rewiring and the replumbing and I was making everything brand spanking new, why leave an older kitchen in there? Why not just put in a new kitchen? Because new kitchens don't have to be expensive. Bearing in mind a flat is often very small, possibly, I don't know, it depends on the sizes, depends on the standard you're buying, but you could get away with 3 to 5 grand. So let's add another 15. So we're now talking about, and this is without touching the roof and the gutters. This is without making good fencing. This is without looking at parking issues and bins and double glazing, and even, well, I probably would put in a brand new front door on that. But, you know, you're looking at another 75,000, 25,000 per flat. Now, 25,000 is a good amount of money to spend refurbishing a house. It's a good amount of money because you're going to add value to the house. You've got 25 grand and you've got all 3 bedrooms, and you've got the kitchen and the bathroom, but now you're spending it on probably a 1, if you're really lucky, a 2-bed flat, and you've got 3 in there or 4 in there or 5 in there, so you've got to double that up. If you're now budgeting 25 grand per flat to be sure that you are safe, that you are compliant, that you do not put your tenants at any form of risk because of greed or a lack of responsibility, now that suddenly makes that quite a bigger proposition. Now what we're looking at is a property that's not just 250,000, but 325,000 in your head for thinking about the maths. So if you get in, say, for example, 600, 650 per flat, let's make it around 2,000. If you get £2,000 for the whole building, this is before you have to pay your mortgage. We're looking at a gross figure of 48,000. So you've got, what did I just say? You're looking at 2,000 per flat, and we're going to multiply that by 12 months of the year. You've got £24,000 coming in a year. That £24,000, if we work out return on investment, You've got a gross of 24,000 coming in, but you are going to basically, I'm cheating, you would buy at 250, but really you need to be buying at 325. You're looking at a gross return on investment at 7%. Now that's still very good, but have you got that much money? You're going to buy it with a mortgage, so that's brilliant. So your mortgage is on the 250,000 purchase price, and that's going to require a deposit of approximately £60,000. But then you've got another £75,000 that you've got just in repairs alone. So you're looking at having 130 to 150 grand to cover potential repair budget, refurbishment budget, and your solicitor's costs, your higher level stamp duty because it's £250,000 property. So you've got to have a lot of money to go in there. So now let's look at it the other way around. If we say we round those numbers up, your deposit, your solicitor's fees, etc., stamp duty, and everything else comes to, let's round it to 150,000. And you're charging £2,000 a month in rent, but out of that you've got to pay a mortgage. So how much is a mortgage on a property bought for 250,000? So if you bought it for 250,000, 75% of that is 187,500. And if we took maybe limited company and it's a flat, let's go 5.99 as a rate, because I know I've just done that for a client on a property that we're mortgaging at the moment. So 5.99 as a rate. So 5.99 on your 187,000 odd divided by 12 means that you have a mortgage cost in the region of £900. You've got 2,000 coming in, so you're going, great, I'm making 1,000 profit, but don't forget you'll have communal costs. You'll have to be collecting in the rent. There'll be some overheads here. Maybe you cover all that off in your freehold. And let's say that you're making 1,000 a month pure profit. 1,000 a month is multiplied up by 12. So you've now got 12,000 a year coming in. But how much did it cost you to buy this? What was your cash in? Do you remember I said 150? So if you take your 12,000 and you divide it by 150, you've got an 8% return. Now you can see why people like these, but it's a bigger cash amount. Instead of having 50k to put in a house, you're looking at 150k to put in the flats. Yes, you're going to be able to, as the freeholder, charge a service charge. You don't want to charge a lot of money to the tenants. Well, actually, if it's a service charge and you own the flat, you'll be paying it back yourself anyway. But if you sold one of the flats and rented two of the flats, that type of thing, that's how you can start to pull some money back in. But an 8% return is quite nice. Net return, remember. You've got 3 flats, so hopefully only one ever comes empty at a time. Once you've done them up, you'll have done all your major works. You'll know it's compliant. Probably won't have to come back round other than doing... You'll have cleaners and you'll have your fire safety checks on a regular basis. You'll have some works doing to whatever the communal area is, which will eat in a little bit because it'll mean if you've got a letting agent, your costs are higher because they'll have to do monthly visits. But even if we say you get 7 or 8% return on your money, that's very tasty, but it costs you a lot of money to get in there. That's the only way that I would be looking at flats. Flats in a block. New build flats, definitely not. Any flat that is where a situation where I'm only the leaseholder and not the freeholder is not something that I would be looking at. So be warned, be warned. Flats can be expensive. They can have restrictions. They could be limited in their capital gain. But there are ways to get around this. And as I say, this is a particular strategy that I'm following for one of my clients, that's what we are shopping for on a regular basis. Now, everybody would be as well. So it's hard to find. You can go a whole other way down the line is where you buy the bigger house and you develop it yourself. But then you're going to have to get planning permission and there's no guarantees. So you've really got to think about this. And if you know what you're getting into, and if you say, well, you know what, I've got my little houses over here, what I'd like to do is buy some flats in an area, typically on a commuter route of some sort, because I know I will get such great rent from them, then that's fine, because you've then balanced and you've started off, as I said to you last week, with that foundation of your simple buy to lets, and then you're adding in maybe a couple of flats or maybe a couple of HMOs. You're spreading the risk and the time and the money costs of those by having that foundation on the ground floor. So I hope I've been able to put a little bit of whoosh into your understanding of the difference between flats and houses, and hopefully that I weighted this podcast very heavily in all of the problems with a flat and then showed you the way round them. But the way round is fewer and far between. It's more likely that people are buying flats without actually understanding what they're getting into. So please pay attention. If you ever have any questions, give me a call or book a call with me, and I will help you out to the best of my ability. My name's been Vicky Wishay, and we've been talking how flats might put a crack in your property foundations.